Okay, hopefully that's working again. I feel, well, two things. One, I feel unprepared to take the last word after yourself, Professor Khan. So I will keep it short. I'm also very aware that I'm standing between everyone and a glass of wine, which is never a good place to be. The other thing I was gonna say, I was so happy that I think, got through the whole day without me having at least heard the word nexus. And then you spoiled it with the last question. But I think there's something important in that. And I have reflected a lot on the fact that I find nexus, apart from it being a problematic word, a uniquely unhelpful way of understanding what it is actually we're talking about. And it's been great to hear the level of nuance and detail over the course of today about really engaging with the challenge in front of the international community, in front of domestic actors. And that it's not about some kind of idea that we just take all our instruments and throw them together and somehow we end up in a better place. But I just want to say a couple of things by way of closing, and maybe try and respond a bit to Andrew's challenge about, so what do we take away from an event like this, a meeting like this? And the challenges are enormous, and I think that was a really great last session, and it brought home, I think, the difficulties that we're facing. And also, I think another theme of this afternoon has been, we're not having a new conversation. We are really going around the same challenges that we've been discussing for many, many, many years. So that can feel deflating, and that can feel like we're kind of stuck in circles. So I think we do need to kind of go to fundamentals and ask ourselves the questions that I think have begun to emerge. And one of the things I took away from that session we had earlier this afternoon is this question about, well, what is aid really for? What is it that the providers of ODA are really trying to achieve? And if we know that there is a trade-off between alignment and visibility, which I think we were hearing about in that third session, if we know that when we're making choices about the kind of instruments we use, the kind of channels we use, we can either lean towards system strengthening, or we can lean towards projects that we can kind of build our own accountability mechanisms around. Then what does that say about why we're making those choices? And this goes to your point, Marcus, about being political and thinking honestly about really what it is that we're trying to do. And I think we've also heard consistently over the course of the day that this isn't just about financing. This isn't just about money. Money is only ever a means to an end. It's only ever a symbol of something. And I think about the implications of kind of where we are and the evolution of funding trends, the cuts to the humanitarian budget. I think that in the long term, what we're really going to reflect on from the last couple of years is the vastly even more significant cuts to development budgets. And I think that in some ways, one of the most important implications is we can't afford to be dishonest. We can't afford anymore to pretend, because it wastes too much time, it wastes too much resources of people who are often in extremely difficult situations. So now honesty is difficult. Maybe some governments who probably most of us in this room are not instinctively aligned with, are showing that they can be a bit more honest in some of their statements. And maybe that spirit of honesty can be useful for helping people not be trapped in kind of performative decision-making. And I think the question that is really sits underneath a lot of what we've been talking about today is, in 2026 and going forwards, what is the role of the state? And we know that all states are struggling without exception. And that's probably always been the case, but it's really, really clear. And we know that in this country, we know that in Europe, we know that in North America, and we know that in what we used to call the developing world. And those struggles are real, and they're shared, and they're about how in a networked, globally financed world where power is dispersed, where power rests, it feels often in the hands of about 6 people in parts of America, how a state kind of makes real claims over legitimacy, over delivery for its people, and can raise the revenues to these models that we've kind of had in our head for a long time. And these are really deeply challenging questions. And the fragile settings that we've been talking about today bring those questions into really sharp focus. And I think we had that discussion earlier about, well, what do we mean by institutions? Is it just ministries of education and health? We know that it's not. It's decentralized structures. It's mayors. There's been a lot of work in the kind of mayoral space over the last few years. But a situation like Sudan and many others, Myanmar, we at the Humanitarian Policy Group, we put out a report on Myanmar last year, which really talked about the kind of emerging alternative state that is starting to form in the context of these extreme conflict environments. So how do we understand these different actors and roles as institutions? And the kind of central point for me, I think, is these are really complex questions. They take us, yes, into questions of politics. They take us into language of governance. They take us into language of accountability. And I think, as Andrew said earlier, there is no, across different parts of the same country, the same region, the questions are wildly different. So if we're serious about strengthening systems, working with locally embedded institutions, which we know are the way to have more sustainable impact over the long term, and if we care about the impact, and I think, Professor, you made the case extremely articulately for why, from a moral perspective or an enlightened self-interest perspective, we should care about these impacts, then we don't have an excuse not to be posing these questions and not to be then equipping ourselves as external actors who are bringing external resources into these environments to say, as a minimum expectation for doing so, we have to capacitate ourselves one way or another to be able to understand these questions and the impact of the choices we're making. And we have to be clear and honest with ourselves about the trade-offs that exist and deal with the complexity. And put ourselves in a position where we can engage in different ways with different actors, and avoiding the temptation, which is always the case in these international settings, to look for a single answer, a single centralized system. And I think in the humanitarian settings where we kind of do our work, there's a real concern. We've all talked a lot about coherence, and there's a lot to be said for pool funds, but a single centralized architecture for engaging with these problems, we know that's not going to equip us to engage with the complexity we're talking about. Julia earlier talked about ecosystems and engaging in understanding ecosystems. So I think for me, the kind of key takeaway is there can't be an excuse for not asking these questions and for not having a response if someone challenges us. Why are you operating in that way? Why have you made that decision about working? And if the answer is, well, look, we don't have an alternative, we feel that the needs are so pressing, our choices are so limited, our risk framework is so challenging that we have to go this way, fine, but be really honest about it. And be ready for a challenge about, okay, what does that mean for 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line? We know the impact of endless short-term decision-making in protracted crisis settings, and it's not going to achieve the kinds of sustainable impacts that everyone claims they're looking for. So I think we really need to hold people's feet to the fire on that, and continue to, as people have said, continue to build that evidence base, continue to demonstrate. We have a lot of models, we have a lot of learning over 50 years, 70 years. We have new ideas, we have new thinking about different forms of capital flows and different forms of financing. There are spaces where there is real energy and new kinds of actors to partner with and work with. But ultimately, it comes back to these choices. And I think it's a really important role to kind of keep the donors and the actors who are stepping into that donor space, keep their feet to the fire. And what are you really trying to achieve? And can we have some honesty around that? So hopefully that's a useful place to end. But thank you very much to everyone for your time today. We really appreciate it, online as well. And this is part of a set of conversations that we're having at ODI. As people will be familiar with, the UK government has recently announced a partnerships conference that's happening in May, which is a kind of a big milestone, I think, here for some of these discussions about where development thinking is going. We're hoping to also bring some of these lessons and thinking into that conversation as well. But we look forward to continuing to work with all of you. So thank you very much indeed.